Here we are, our newest episode with our newest person. And I'm excited for this one because we're going to be going somewhere very different, specifically the Pacific continent, with a Pacific continent study abroader. So I will let you take it away, Dylan. Introduce
All right.
yourself to the world and let us know who you are and what you do. Basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. My name is Dylan. I'm here because I studied abroad in Australia. I went to the opposite side of the globe from the US. The 14-hour time difference is what it was. I went to Elizabethtown College, which is Jamie's alma mater, and I graduated in May of 2020. I know. Pour one out for my never getting a graduation ceremony. I was canceled from COVID. I currently work with youth programs at York College, serving through the AmeriCorps. So I'm looking into nonprofit careers and things like that. Today I'm here to talk about Australia.
Great stuff. And maybe some other stuff, but
and maybe some other stuff.
Australia itself is, I'm sure we can have a mountain of things to talk about that. Sure. Normally, like when you spend that study abroad experience or a significant amount of time in a country, you can talk about literally a day's worth of stuff just for 1 week if you were there for like a week mission trip. But I remember like the photos per se of like anybody that went to like Australia and New Zealand and like the fun that they had. I was always like, wow, I really wonder what's going on down there.
Yeah, it's a different, the toilet bowl spin in the opposite direction. You know what I mean? Like when even that most fundamental fact is changed, anything goes. Anything could be different.
It's very different. It's very different. One of my highlight experiences in Europe, when I was in Budapest, there was a Australian hostel. So it was like in Budapest. It was like a Budapest hostel technically, but it was run by Australians, and they very much like Australianized that whole entire. Like I didn't feel like I was in Budapest anymore.
Did they give you free sausages?
Yes, that's free sausages. Yes, it was the whole shebang. And I was like, whoa, where are we? But that's what we were looking for, like something in the sense that was like not like the sense of like home America, but like it was different. it was not Budapest, but it was not the US.
So. Australia is kind of like America's like a cousin or something. Like it's very connected because we're culturally very similar, but then like there are the clear differences that are like very pronounced when you're there. So I think it's like not like America's like sibling. Like the UK is like America's like, I don't know, like parent or something, or like sibling, but like Australia's like our cousin.
Okay. Who was it that told me? I think when during one of our admission shifts, I was with Miranda DeLauder. She went to New Zealand. It'd be great to get her on here. She said like she thought like New Zealand was kind of like a little America, like in the most physical and literal sense, like because New Zealand's just that.
New Zealand's tiny,
like that 2 island%. And I was like, so like, what did you think of like New Zealand just as like a whole? She's like, it reminds me of like a little America. And then like Australia is kind of like Australia.
Australia's like a big America, but the same size. I don't know what you like. Yeah, it's the cultures are very similar. So like when I was there, everyone in Australia knows about like American celebrities and American television and American, you know, like I was always so embarrassed because when I was there, Donald Trump was president. So I was like, oh, what do you think of Donald Trump being president and all that stuff? And like I'd be like, oh, you know, I tell them all about it, and then I'd be like, and who's the prime minister of Australia again? What's his name? Like I didn't know nothing. Now I do. Scott Morrison when I was there. I think it's changed. But when I was there, when I first got there, I was so embarrassed like that they knew like all this stuff, and they're like, oh my gosh, like what do you think about what Alexandria AOC, you know what she said like last week? And I'd be like, I didn't even see that. Like I can't believe that you did. Like they literally would be more up to date on news about America than I was. So like yeah, it's crazy. They're our cousin for sure.
So let's talk about that process in itself. So going back a few years, you decide where you're going to go abroad. So what were the options? What were you thinking? And ultimately, why choose the complete opposite side of the world in Australia?
Well, the word opposite is actually the key. And so I went to Elizabethtown College, which is a very small liberal arts school, not a research university, in the heart of rural Pennsylvania. And I'm happy with that choice. I enjoyed my time in college. But I was like, okay, my time abroad is basically one semester at a different university, right? So my goal was I want the most opposite experience as I can possibly have from my regular undergrad, right? Because I'm like, I want to experience everything that's the exact opposite of what my time is here, so I can know what that's like and see if I like, some of these aspects that are opposite. So I went to the opposite side of the world. I went to a giant city and I went to a giant research university to try and like oppositize everything about my study abroad as compared to my undergrad. So that's why I picked. It was between Australia and New Zealand at that point because they were both opposite. But the advice I give to everyone is live in Australia, travel to New Zealand. And so I followed that advice for myself before I even knew that was the advice I'd be giving. But I read that advice on the internet, followed it, and that's the advice that I give too. Live in Australia, travel to New Zealand.
So. Okay, so delve into that a little bit. So when you were doing your research and you were deciding between those two countries, like you just mentioned, where were you finding that in? Because so Australia and New Zealand, to me, the only anecdotes I have are like from the people who went to New Zealand mainly. I don't know too many people who were from Australia. You're one of the few. So when you looked into that, where did you find that information? And did you see it consistently? Like, were you consistently reading like live in Australia, travel to New Zealand? And
yeah,
what hit that idea home mainly?
So I guess I should say that's the advice that I normally give unless you're a big nature junkie. So New Zealand is beautiful. I can talk about that, about when I went there. New Zealand is the most gorgeous place I've ever been. They say it and Ireland are about the two most beautiful places that most people agree are the most beautiful places on Earth. But there aren't giant cities in New Zealand the way there are in Australia. So Australia has Sydney, Melbourne, and to a lesser extent, Canberra and Brisbane, as well as Perth out on the west coast. Those are all big, big cities with lots going on. And New Zealand really just has the one, which is Wellington. The rest of the cities that I traveled to were really smaller cities. So, cities of, 100 or 200,000 people rather than several million. And so if you want the experience of the cultural mixing pot and, the big concerts of, multinational stars and, all these different, these giant, streets full of carnivals and all those kinds of things, those happen in the huge cities. And for study abroad, that's what a lot of people are looking for. And that's what I was looking for too. And so that's the advice that I give to students is that you either want to go to Wellington if you want those kinds of things, or you should probably just live in Australia and travel to New Zealand. But if you love mountains and forests and lakes and rivers, there's more of those in New Zealand, at least more per square mile. Australia is so much bigger. There's probably more total in Australia, but you'll find them closer together in New Zealand, more beautiful natural places. So that's why I say that.
Yep. And Australia itself is like, it's a massive land. It's huge.
Australia in square miles or square kilometers is pretty much the same as the United States. People don't realize that. It's a little smaller. But the contiguous United States, obviously Alaska, it kind of skews us. But the 48, it's pretty much the same size. So like Australia is huge. Now the population is way lower because, as you probably know, Australia is like, a huge portion of it is desert. So like everyone just lives along the outer rim, and then like everything in the middle is just desert. And there's like a few people that live there, but not very many. So
Gotcha. So tell me about where you went specifically. I think the affiliated that university that I remember was James Cook, but if I'm correct, you went to a different one.
Yes.
You went to Melbourne.
Yes, the University of Melbourne. Yep.
Cool.
And I'll go ahead and say now that I am going to call it Melbourne, which is the way that the locals call it. They tell Americans to, like, as if you were talking about a trash bin, like you just put Melbourne. And I think that's because if you try and say Melbourne in an Australian accent, which I will not try and do, but if you would try to do it, it would end up being Melbourne, right? That's like how you would say it in an Australian accent. And so I can't erase that habit from my brain. I actually learned that before I even got there. So I was practicing in my room, like Melbourne, so that I wouldn't get it wrong when I got there. So yes, the University of Melbourne, which is the largest research university, think like Penn State, Ohio State, those kinds of like huge universities. I think it was like 35,000 undergraduate students, so very large, right in the heart of the city of Melbourne, which is a city of about 4.5 million people.
Awesome. And of course, that's very different from rural Pennsylvania. Like you're going from 1800 to like any town in itself. I feel like the two of us, we made like the experience the best it could. But then you go abroad and you're in this whole other world. So Tell me about that. You're on that plane, you land, you get to this orientation program. What was that difference like when you got there? What did you see that was so different from like what you knew at E-Town?
I mean, it was crazy. I can't even begin to so talking about colleges specifically, because I mean I've been to big cities before, but like I haven't ever gone to a big university, right? So if we're talking about the differences between Eton College and the University of Melbourne, the biggest one was finding your classroom, man. So like, you know, like the first day of class, right? Like now we did a good job of like my entire abroad group, we went on and like found our classrooms in advance. But like at E-Town, the first day of class, I could just like find my classroom. Like I didn't need to like go do it in advance because you know, it was like Nike had 2 floors, right? And like it was either Nike 100 something or 200 something, and I could find that within 5 minutes. But like, you know, like the classroom buildings, this is in the heart of like thinking about like a city like Manhattan, right? Like it's like in the heart of a city, and it's a giant university, and so it's not giant land wise, as they couldn't do that. You couldn't have an expansive campus. The expanse is all up. So like all the classroom buildings are like 12, 15 stories high, and so like you're like you know, not all of them, I shouldn't say that, but some of the more modern ones are like could reach that high, right? And so like my business building was like that, and I was like, what? And then of course like not only is it that high, but it's also like way wider to accommodate that many students. And so like I'm like, okay, business building 1028, and I'm like, where the heck, like which floor is that? And like what which of these like 6 hallways is my room in? So that was a huge change. Also a huge change the number of clubs, right? So like at E-Town, there's a respectable number of organizations, I think, for the size of the campus, but
yeah.
To accommodate all the different interests of the students, at the University of Melbourne, and to make sure there's no club with like, 20,000 members or whatever, like there's just a ton of clubs, many of them about the same thing, right? Just like a bunch of like copy clubs basically, so that like you can accommodate, all the students. And so like at like the like club day, because I always go to club day at E-Town because, I want to get involved. But at club day, I was like overwhelmed. I always like take notes on like which ones I want to be involved in. And I was like, okay, I just wrote down like 30 organizations. So I can't be involved in all of these. I'm only like a quarter of the way through the fair. So yeah, very, very different from my Elizabethtown experience, but in the best way. I learned so much, and I really, really enjoyed it. So, yeah.
Anxiety attack.
Yeah, it was such a everything about it was a culture shock in the best way, and like just like constantly like going outside and like just seeing streams and throngs of like people my age just like flowing down the path to the next class. You know what I mean? Like if like class that's out of E-Town, you like might pass by a couple friends on the way. Good luck even finding your friends. Even if you are passing by them, there's like 10,000 people in the classes let out there. They're just all crossing the campus at all different paths and are all going, because again, like you think about like around here, like Penn State and Ohio State are like huge, like land wise, but University of Melbourne is like packed into a pretty compact space because it's in like the downtown of the city. And so like going from classroom to classroom, you might have like seriously 3,000 people heading from one building to the building next door, like 3,000 people that are all just like leaving the building at the same time. Like that's a little overwhelming. The one building had 6 elevators to accommodate all the people that were going to be going up and down. So yeah, it was great though. I sound like I'm complaining, but it was really interesting. It was really exciting.
It's one big system that somehow figures out a way to work.
Yes.
It somehow makes it happen because it has to happen. That's the only option.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is that most people that go to the University of Melbourne have lived in cities all of their life, and so like they're very used to it. But I was not. So for me, it was definitely more of an adjustment than it was for a lot of other folks that like would be normally going there. So.
Yeah. I love when like these are my favorite like study abroad stories to hear, because when people say like, oh, like one of my favorite ones was when somebody went to like Barcelona, and like La Universitat de Barcelona is exactly what you're describing right now. Like she went there and she went into a class of 300 students and they were speaking like really fast pure Spanish. She like anxiety attack right away. just because it's not like at E-Town you don't have that. Like your attendance somewhat is monitored. They email you if you're not there. People know, like you go to the cafeteria and like people are like, where were you? Because that's just the culture of like a smaller school. Whereas like a big school, it's not that they don't care, it's that they can't, because they have other things to focus on.
My profs could not pick me out of a crowd. Like, are you kidding me? Like, they couldn't pick me out of a lineup. They couldn't, like, if 6 people would stand side by side, they wouldn't be able to know which one of them was their student. Like, unless I like took a lot of like, there was a music class that I took that like was a smaller class, and like I like was really involved because I like music a lot. So she would maybe recognize me, but in all my other classes, like, yeah, Yeah, emails about your attendance. No. In fact, all the classes were recorded. So this is before Zoom, right? But all the classes were live streamed over the internet, and also recorded, and the recordings were sent out to all the students. And so many students literally didn't go to class at all. They only went to class if there was an exam, and
Yes.
they would just skip every other time of the class and just watch the recording later at like 2 times speed and like just try and like absorb all the knowledge into their brains that way. I did not do that because I'm like the classic like goody two shoes student, but like I did that a couple times when I was like going to be absent, and that was like how I made it up, which is what it's supposed to be used for. But
Yeah.
but yeah, so like the difference between like your attendance counts for points and I literally never go to class. That's a big gulf to cross in one day. So.
Oh man. So this is exciting. This is the first time I'm hearing about like anything Australia. So this is neat. So tell me about that plane ride and like how that was like physically getting there, because you're literally crossing the opposite side of the world with that 14-hour time zone difference. So before that, what was like the longest flight you had? And then when you were getting on that flight and you finally arrived, like what was that jet lag of like I'm just curious to know how that physically felt, like having
Yeah,
to go through
sure.
that.
So my longest flight in the past would have been when I went to Europe. I was an 8-hour flight. So that was nothing compared to the well, it was 2 flights. So in total, I was in the air for 23 hours. I was flying. So almost a full day of flight, and that does not include of course, the layovers in the airports, right? Getting to the airport early, and then like it was 2 flights, so like the in between time. So I was involved in airports for like 25 or 26 hours, and yeah, it was wild. So my 8-hour flight was like, you're sitting down for 8 hours. It's like not ideal, but like it's like I was at that time I was a kid too, so it was like a little bit easier. My legs weren't as long. Uh, the flight. But here's the thing: everyone thinks they're like, oh, I couldn't imagine doing like a day-long flight. Like I don't know how you did it, but like the thing is that they know that people are gonna like struggle with a 24-hour flight. Again, not that's 2 flights, but you know what I mean. They know people are gonna struggle with that, so they really accommodate you very well. On the long flight that I took from Texas out to Sydney, which was in total like 18 hours or something like that. On that flight, it was from Qantas, which is an airline that operates almost exclusively out of Australia, either to or from Australia. They know that people are like not used to flights that long, and they make their flights pretty accommodating. So like the seats actually have some okay space, even in economy. They actually have some okay space between you and the person in front of you, so you're able to lean back a little bit. They have these like nice like pillows they give you that are actually okay pillows. I still have one to this day because like they were so nice. I was like, I can't leave this behind on the plane. Like I'm keeping this. This is a great pillow. And the most
It's going in the
important
bag.
part is that that's a common theme with me, is that if it's not clear whether it was given to me or borrowed to me, and it was from like a big company that can handle the loss, I usually take it. But anyways, we don't need to talk about that too much. But the most important part about the long flight is that Qantas knows that you're going to be bored, so they have an awesome entertainment catalog. Like a lot of like flights, they put on like really crappy movies that came out like 20 years ago and like you don't really care about, and they're like buzzing on a quiet volume on like an overhead monitor. But like on Qantas, like at least in these long haul flights that I was on, they have a screen right in front of you. You have your own personal screen with like quality actual movies that you really want to see. So like I watched Slumdog Millionaire, I watched The Hangover. I'm trying to remember what else I watched. Oh, I watched Predator because I'd never seen that before and I really wanted to see it.
Yes.
But like they also had like TV shows that were like modern, like the like most recent season of like shows people wanted to watch. So like it was like really quality entertainment. The craziest thing, people never believe me when I say this, but on the flight home, I was actually like low key a little excited because like I was like, oh, there was a couple movies I didn't get to see like on my way down, and like I'd really like to like I had like a list of like movies I wanted to watch on the flight, and like I was like a little bit excited for like the flight. So they really do a good job of making sure that it's not. I mean, like physically, it's a little taxing to sit in one place for a full day, but like the entertainment makes it a little better. It's kind of like a sick day, you know what I mean? You're just like laying around watching movies for a full day, and then you're done and you're in a different country.
Life passes by for one day.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about the time zones is that you actually lose a day in one direction and then gain a day in the other. So I wish I could remember off the top of my head, but in one of the directions, basically you like skip a day. Like you like leave, on like a Tuesday, and then like you arrive on like, like mid Wednesday or even like early Thursday. Like you like skip like a full day because of the time zones. And then the other way, you like pick up, you like live through the same day twice. So like you live through Tuesday and then like another Tuesday and then and then you land. And I wish I could remember, someone who's watching can look it up. I forget.
I think I only know this because I watch when the ball drops every New Year. If I'm correct, Australia and New Zealand are the first ones to drop the ball.
Yeah,
So
they're in the future. They're in the future. So you
they're the day ahead.
skip when you're going there because you have to arrive in the future. But then when you go back, you
go
live
back.
through the same day twice because you're traveling into the past, which is kind of kooky. But like it's weird because like you're not really time traveling because your body is still experiencing the same amount of hours. But just on like the way humans track time, you're living through the same day twice, which is like that's the weirdest part. I mean, like skipping a day ahead is kind of weird, but that's sort of like again like a sick day, right? Like you like fell asleep and like you like live through like an extra like day that you never actually lived through. But like the like living through the same day twice, that was a little like weird for me. And that was a strange experience for sure.
One of my like unnecessary, really stupid, like I hope it doesn't happen, but I hope it does happen, bucket list goals is to like travel to New Zealand and watch the ball drop and then have a flight like 3 hours later that takes me back to the United States. And then like I hope I get back in time to watch the ball drop again.
That is a really stupid bucket list.
But I watch it every year because like when I watch the ball drop, New Zealand's always the first one to have the ball drop because they're in that time zone. So like I joke with like my family, I'm like I want to see it happen twice. Like I want to do it in New Zealand and I want to go back and I want to fly back to the States and like New York, and I don't even care if I get there like 15 minutes before. I just want the euphoria of being around crazy people watching the ball drop again.
that sounds really stupid and a giant waste of like thousands of dollars to fly. But you know what? You go for it. I have an easier way if you want to accomplish something similar though. The Burj Khalifa in I think it's the UAE. It's the tallest building in the world. It's so tall that if you watch the sunrise from the bottom, you can take the elevator to the top and watch the sunrise again. So not as exciting as the New Year's ball drop, but at least you could like pretend like you're traveling through time in a much less expensive way, just paying to take the elevator instead of paying. Like flights to New Zealand are not cheap, like 1,200 each way. So
yeah, they're pretty funny. Oh man! So when you pay for your flight ticket, did you do like the flight that they recommended, or did you like just book your own flight? Like, did they give you a recommended flight, or did you just look for your own?
Yeah, so when I traveled to Australia, when I picked to go there and like started working preparations, I was a travel noob and I made a lot of silly travel decisions. And then when I traveled home, I was a veteran, but I had to live with my past choices. So so I got a round trip flight, which that was smart. You should get a round trip flight for expensive flights because they're cheaper. But I booked it through a travel agency that the abroad program recommended, which is so silly. A travel agency is good if you don't want to like plan things and like you want them to like help you like with like a plan, right? Or like learn about an area. But you don't need a travel agency to book like a flight or like one hotel. You know what I mean? Like all that does is just make it more expensive because they have to take their cut. And so, if anyone's watching this who's like a travel newbie like I was before I went there, for simple tasks, you do not need a travel agency. You can do it. I believe in you. You can do it. Use an agency if you feel uncomfortable with like a week trip, you're going to a brand new place, you know anything about it, you want to like learn more information. Even then, you can just do the research yourself, which is what I do. But like, I understand it then. But for like a single thing, like booking a flight or like getting one hotel, you don't need a travel agency. So don't do it. But anyways, so I did. So I got a travel agency and they booked my flight on Qantas for me. I am a little grateful that I did the agency only because I probably would have gone for the absolute cheapest option and it wouldn't have gotten a great movie catalog. So I'm a little happy with that, but it was definitely more money than I needed to pay. So
I agree with that. So the reason I asked that is because when I was never even on a plane. Like when I went abroad the first time, I didn't even know what a plane was. Like I knew what it was, but like
what the experience was like.
I had no idea what life was what I was expecting. And BCA for Spain, they had like a travel agency as well. Mm-hmm. And I paid for my flight ticket and I went to my uncle. I should have went to my uncle first because he travels all over. And I paid like $1,000 for my ticket to go to Spain back and forth. And he's like, why would you pay what? Why would you pay that much? And I was like, I went to a travel agency. He's like, why would you do that? And I'm like, I've never I've never done this before. I don't know. Like, I had the money saved up because I saved up money prior to like the summer. Like, I knew I was going. So like, I just spent it all on that. And he's like, and I look back at it now and the same thing. Like, I'm happy I did that because I had no idea what I was doing, but I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to go through a travel agent. But there was part of me deep down that was very happy because when I got there, there was only 2 people out of the 10 people in my cohort that were there. It was me and somebody else from a university in Wisconsin. And we were looking around and we're like, where is everybody? Because we were all supposed to be at the airport by a specific time. And I was under the impression that everybody was taking the same flight and that I was going to meet them and like it was going to be like love at first sight. Like we were all going to meet each other and like be the bestest of friends. But I was the only one on that flight. So I was like, what's going on here? And then I finally put 2 and 2 together and they took a different flight, but they didn't get there. My cohort didn't get there until like 5 days after the fact because they took like this really cheap airline called Air Portugal and they had like significant problems getting there. So the flight didn't even leave on time. It left the day after because they were having like issues with like the air pilot. The pilot for some reason was having issues getting to Pennsylvania. So he had to land in Jersey and they never left the day that we were supposed to leave. And then the pilot apparently, I don't know, I don't remember exactly what happened. For some reason, the pilot couldn't get to Spain. The pilot had to stop in Portugal after a day that they couldn't get to Pennsylvania. So then they had to stay in Portugal for a weekend until they could take another flight to finally get to Madrid. So they showed up like 5 days after the fact. And we didn't know anything. Like my friend and I at the time, they just told us, they lied to us. They told us that, oh, like they're taking the flight 5 days after the fact. They got mixed up with the dates. And I was like, how do you get mixed up with the day that you're going to start taking classes? Like we took 2 classes without these people.
Holy crap.
There was 2 people. There was just me and this girl from Wisconsin just taking classes. They never showed up. And after the second day, we're like, is it just us? And then they finally told us the truth. They said that they had like the nightmarish flight from hell that like they got delayed by a day in Pennsylvania, so they had to stay at a hotel in Pennsylvania. Then they got delayed in Portugal and they had to stay in Portugal for the weekend. Then they finally got to Spain. And when they finally got to Spain, they were so upset that they didn't want to go to class the next day. So they rested. And then the program or manager had to have a whole nother orientation for them because we already had orientation, my friend and I. So then we finally meet them. And I remember like their faces of dread. They were just so upset. They all had like bags under their eyes. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. It was, and we all looked at each other. We both looked at each other, my friend and I, and we were like, I guess that travel agency flight wasn't that bad.
Yeah. That's my other advice. People that are studying abroad, traveling specifically, is that you should try and get there a couple days early, like at least a day or 2, because of stuff like that. Now 5 days is, that's like an extreme anomaly. I feel terrible for those people, but that's why I always say like that's what I did is like I got there a couple days early in case of that, because I had something similar with my group where a couple folks got there. I think it was like 2 days late because their flight had some problems. And like, if I had gotten there 2 days late, but I had planned to be there 2 days early, then I would have just been right on time. So like that's that's some good advice for folks that are studying abroad as well. Now, if you're doing on vacation, obviously like it's like very expensive to like add days onto your vacation. But if you're studying abroad and you can be there for months, like a couple extra days is like a drop in the bucket, right? So give yourself peace of mind, and yeah, it can be better to. I'm a real penny pincher, but it can be better to splurge on like at least the mid tier, not like the luxury, but like at least the mid tier flight. So you'll be treated with a little more respect and have a little more confidence in your arrival date. So.
Yes. And then I asked them, I'm like, are you guys taking that flight back? And they're like, we have to. So I was like,
oh no.
But now I just do my own research. Now like I know which airlines are great, and like I use Skyscanner a lot and like Kayak. So I've never taken Air Portugal. It sounds like the imitation of Spirit. Like that's never gonna happen.
I've ridden Spirit Airlines before.
So no thanks. But okay, so you get there, you have that incredible flight, and you're finally there. You're living this Melbourne, Australian experience. You're seeing the clubs that everything that have to offer. What stood out with you about Australia? When I think of Australia, I think of kangaroos. I think of like just this really laid back lifestyle. I think of like trying to remember what's the sport that they play? It's like football, but it's not football.
Rugby? You mean
rugby? I think of rugby. Yeah. Tell us about some things that stood out to you when you got to Australia. Just in time.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So, Australia in general, I think the culture is, it's more like, I guess, like in your face or kind of loud, I think. Now, I know there are parts of America that are like that. Like, I know Boston is oftentimes like characterized that way, but I've never been to Boston. I feel like Australia, like their commercials are very much like, it's usually like a guy with like a loud Australian accent who's like, "Come on down, mate, to like this great place." You know, it's like very like the commercials for Outback Steakhouse. That's like how like all the commercials are there. You know what I mean? And so like there's like yeah, you know what I mean? Like so there's that. I think it's also like the the young adults are much more like independent. I don't know why that is, but I feel like I don't know what it is about American culture, but I feel like the young adults there are just like more ready for like the world when they grow up. It could be because the young adults there tend to be more civically engaged because they have to be. This is a crazy thing. You probably didn't know this. Australia has compulsory voting. When you reach voting age, you are required to go to the polls and cast a vote. And so like I think that's just like one of the examples of just like they just put more responsibility on their young people, I think, to like figure things out. And to like take more control of their lives from a young age and to make their own choices. You know, like universities don't like coddle the freshmen as much. You know what I mean? Like they don't. So first of all, the university and the residences are different. So if there is like a dormitory, it's owned by a separate company usually, and who like runs like a campus that's just like a dormitory and a cafeteria, right? And then like you pay tuition to the college, and then you pay like room and board to them. But most Australians live with their parents and go to a university that they can commute to. Like commuting is much more common, and so like because of that, like the university like doesn't like they have orientation, but it's not like, oh, here's your orientation leader, and like we'll take you step by step to like all your classes and like learn all this stuff. Like orientation is just like you get a schedule of like all the things that are happening, and it's just like show up. You know what I mean? Like come at your own pace, like come at your own like. So, and again, like this could just be like the university that I went to or the the area that I was in, but it feels like the culture there is a lot more like, especially with young people, it's like, you can do this, like figure it out, like we believe in you, and like we'll support you, but we're not gonna like, you know, coddle you or like do things for you. Like once you're an adult, you're an adult, and it's like it's time to be an adult and to do your own stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the biggest cultural thing I noticed about Melbourne specifically, and this is not true for all of Australia, but it's always an interesting anecdote, is that Sydney and Melbourne are the two largest like westernized cities that are in close proximity to Asia. And so Australia itself, but specifically the urban centers, have a huge Asian influence. Huge. One of my favorite stories from Australia is so my friend Qasim, he's from Pakistan, and he did his entire undergrad at the University of Melbourne, but like he hadn't been to Australia before that. Like the University of Melbourne is very prestigious, so like he enrolled without having ever been to Australia, and like came there for his first week of classes for orientation. So he flies into Melbourne, he lands, and he walks out into the city, and he's looking around, and he starts panicking because he realizes he must have gone to the wrong city, because everywhere he looks are people that are of Asian descent, and he can't see any white people anywhere. And he's like, oh my gosh, I didn't go to the right place. So he places an international call to his mom. And he's like, Mom, I got on the wrong plane. Like I'm not in Australia. I'm like somewhere in like East Asia. Like I didn't leave Asia. Like I didn't get to Australia. And then she's checking like his location. She's like, no, you're there. He's like, Mom, there's all Asian people here. And she's like, yeah, that's Melbourne. It's like, I don't know what the percentage is, but a very high percentage are of Asian descent there. And so even though it's like it's a Western country and like it's like they speak English there and like it's like I had the Australian experience, I very much had like the melting pot Asian experience as well. Because in Melbourne, there we always used to joke that if you were trying to find like a native Australian, you'd have to bump into 9 Asian people first. So like that was like a joke we used to make in our cohort. And so and that's a wonderful thing, right? Is one of the things I'm worried about going to Australia is that it would be too similar to the US. But because I went to a big city, that was not the case. There was these huge, and again, this is not across all of Australia. If you go to the more rural areas, it's very much like, white people. But in the cities, in Melbourne and in Sydney, there's just such a diverse mix of cultures, mostly Asian cultures. So, I got to have cuisine from Japan and from China and from Malaysia and from India and Pakistan and I can go on and on, right? And that was an incredible part of the experience for me. And a really cool cultural thing about Melbourne specifically, about the place that I was in, is that because it's a melting pot, it's really welcoming of people from other cultures. Like people aren't surprised to hear that you're from a different country. It's very normal there. And so like it's like a right away, it's just like, it's like, oh hi, it's like, oh, the Australian accent, are you an American, or are you Yankee? And oh yeah, I'm a Yank. And that's just like, and then that's it. That's the full conversation. Then they just go right back to whatever they're talking about. It's not like a interrogation. Like, it's very much like, again, I don't know what this is like in the whole country, but they're very much welcoming of people from all other countries, because that's most people that live there. So
it's exciting. So yeah. like a diverse. I was not expecting that. I was thinking just like regular city, like regular diversity, but this is like this guy called his mom and was like, I don't think I'm in the right place.
He literally thought he was still in Asia. Like, that's like one of my favorite stories to tell, is like, because people don't understand until I tell them that. Like, you literally, if you didn't know, if I blindfolded you and sent you there and you didn't listen, because everyone talks in English, right? So like,
yeah.
But like, if I sent you there and like, turn the audio off and blindfolded you, you might guess that you were in China or Japan or Malaysia. Like, you probably wouldn't guess that you were in a city in Australia. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful.
That's awesome. We joked, my study abroad friends and I, when we were from our bus. So like when you get there, you get to like Madrid. Madrid is normally where you almost always go for our program where we were at. And then it's a 2.5-hour bus ride from Madrid back to Valladolid. We joked that when we got to Madrid, that it didn't feel like we were in Madrid. Like it felt like we were in like England, because everybody spoke English. And that's because like Madrid is not a melting pot. Like it's not a melting pot. Like there is very much like a lot of diversity for sure, but there's this cultural phenomenon per se of like everybody in Madrid needs to speak English. Like it's just how it is. It's just how in Barcelona that's not the case. Like people speak English in Barcelona, but it's more so they'll speak Catalan. Whereas like in Madrid, you better know English. Like if you cross by anybody in Madrid, if they don't speak English, something is wrong. So like when we went to the airport at first, we're like, I don't think we're in Spain, but we were, of course. And then as we were driving from the bus from the airport to Madrid to Valladolid, we felt like, no joke, we thought like we were in Africa, because the trees were very like African-based trees. Like these trees were so like it did not feel like we were in like a European country. Like it felt like the land of like in like an African like territory per se, like African land. And like we joked half of it, but then we were like, guys, like this does not look like like we're in a European country. And then once we finally got closer to Valladolid, then it like looked a little bit more like we were in like Europe a little bit.
Well, I mean, people forget too that like Spain is right next to Africa. Like Morocco is right, is like right across the border. So it's like right there's strong, and if you look in history, there's strong African influences on Spanish culture and history. So that doesn't surprise me at all, actually.
And then we found that out because none of us had, I don't want to say the courage, but like we just didn't bring it up at all to our professors. And we're like, is there like, it feels like a very heavy African influence when it comes to like the land and the nature. And they're like, oh yeah, Morocco is right next to us. And there will be like a lot of times when like some Spaniards would migrate to Morocco. And then there's always times when like Moroccans migrate to like Spain. So that's sometimes the work that they might be laying out. So that made sense after the fact. But at first when we got there, we were like, are we where we need to be? But culture can just influence another culture so strongly, which is the most beautiful part of traveling. Like you see something from another culture within the culture that you're already visiting. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was not ready for the fact that I was going to make so many different friends from Asian countries. Like I really thought I'd make friends from Australia, and I did make a couple. But honestly, I probably made, outside of my cohort of Americans, who probably ended up like I got closest to them. But in terms of people that I met there that weren't from America, I think I honestly got closest to people that were from Asia, that were from China and Pakistan and India. So, you know, and I'm very happy to say that, because I was worried about that with going to a Western country. I was worried about that I wouldn't get that cultural influence, and I think that's one of the great things about going to. And it would be the same if you went to Sydney. People listening, it'd be the same if you went to Sydney. It's the same experience there. And so, you know, that's one of the really awesome things about Australia is you actually get. I know one of my friends said that some people actually think the best place to try Asian food is in Melbourne, because you won't get the most authentic of any particular cuisine. Like the best Japanese food is obviously in Japan, and the best Chinese food is in Japan, or it's in China. It's in China.
Yeah. Maybe Japan. Who knows? But China.
Yeah. But if you want like the second rate of a whole bunch of countries, they're all in Melbourne. So like it's like sort of like the best place to try Asian food, because like it's like you'll get like the second class, like the silver tier of like that country's cuisine, but just like all in one street. You know what I mean? So it's a really awesome experience.
Yes. So when you think of Australia, you look back to those like life-changing 4 months. What did you really enjoy as a whole, in general? Like through your time there, like when you woke up and like you spent like your daily life there studying and doing your like your thing, what did you really enjoy about Australia? Like what when you would wake up like excited you? Like what did you really enjoy about being there in Australia?
Yeah, daily life is interesting. So I think for me, the entire culture of Melbourne was just so exciting to me. I think a lot of people in the US have this opinion of their local big city, that it's like dirty or like unsafe, but like that's not anyone's opinion of Melbourne that I met. People used to walk around the streets of Melbourne in their bare feet because they were that unafraid of there being like glass or whatever that would like hurt them. Like they were just that confident in like the cleanliness of the streets. And like there was seriously a cultural festival there every weekend. And so like every week when I would get up, I would just be looking forward to like what the next cultural festival is going to be. I'd be like, oh, this week it's going to be, you know, like Latin American week, or like, oh, this week is going to be like the Greece festival. And so like I think there's like that energy that you can just like, it's hard to put your finger on, but you can just like feel it in the whole city. So I think it was definitely that. The public transit there, I also look forward to and really enjoyed. American cities have a long way to go to catch up to the tram system they have in Melbourne, which Americans used to have trolley cars in all of our cities, and that's basically what a tram line is. It's just a modern trolley system, but Melbourne just never got rid of their trolley lines and just put trams on instead. Whereas Americans tore up all our trolley lines and put in roads. But trams are so convenient. They're so convenient. You know, you do not need a car to live anywhere that the tram goes, because you can just hop on, and it'll take you, like there's a tram line on every street. Like the tram can take you anywhere in the downtown area, and so you can go to any again, those festivals, or if you're going to a local like store or a bar, or you're going to the mall, or wherever you're going, like if you can't walk there, you can always just hop on the tram. And in the central downtown area, like their version of Manhattan, they call it the Central Business District. The tram is actually free, so you can actually get on and go and travel all around the downtown and experience the different stuff down there, and you don't have to pay a dime. Like you can just hop on and hop off completely for free. And so that was incredible. And it was similar when I was in Sydney. They have a subway system. They're building a tram because Melbourne's is better, but they have a subway system that's also free in a certain section of the city. And so, or at least it was when I was there. I know that they were modifying it a lot because they were trying to put in a tram. But yeah, so I think that was really cool and really encouraged a lot of tourism and things like that. So I really enjoyed that. I also enjoyed the more moderate weather. I live here in Pennsylvania, and it gets cold, and Melbourne is along the coast. So even though it's in the southern hemisphere. So even though Melbourne is at the southern point of the country, it's actually in the coldest part of Australia, because that's how that works. The northern part of the country is the warmest. Even so, Melbourne's right next to the coast. and so it's pretty moderate weather. It doesn't get any colder than like 40 degrees maybe, and so like, and that's like in like the dead of winter, and
Yeah.
so the more moderate weather was really nice. I really enjoyed that. The university experience was really awesome. Aside from the fact that no one came to the classes, and I was one of like 10 people that was actually going to class. The rest of the university was really awesome. They used to give out, I think I said this really early on in the podcast, but they give out free sausages just all the time, just like for fun. You'll just be walking through the student quad, and there'll just be a table, and there'll be like 500 people in line, and they're just like all lining up to get a free sausage. It's a piece of white bread, and then they just they hand that to you at the beginning of the line. Then you go to the next step, and then they pick up a sausage. They either ask you if you want the traditional pork sausage, or like a turkey, I think, if you're like not interested in red meat. And then you tell them what you want, and then they just plop it on diagonally in the bread, so that you just like scoop the bread around it. Then the next step is sauce, so you just put over sauce on, and then you walk away. And the whole thing is like every person's going through in like 3 seconds. It's like boop boop boop, and then they like, and so like, and that's how they just like are flowing through this huge line of people, and it's completely free. And I found out very early on that people weren't asking this. People didn't know this, but if you walk up and you're like, 2 please, they'll give you two free sausages. So a lot of times I didn't pay for lunch, because I would just be walking through campus, and I would just see a free sausage station. Like, all right, here's lunch, 2 please, and then you couldn't put sauce on because your hands are full, but just scoop them up, and then just, as you're walking to class, you do that. So that, and like that culture persisted, like. Because of the moderate weather, and because like the quad was huge, and because it was like things to do in the quad, there was like always something going on in the student quad. There was just always people congregated there. So like you could just walk past people, and they'd be sitting in the shade of a tree hanging out, or like people would be like laying on a blanket and talking and doing their work. Like it was just like a very much like a congenial atmosphere. I think that happens at a lot of large universities, but
Yeah.
But yeah, so all of that was things that I enjoyed.
Awesome. I really like. I question sometimes how different like the E-Town experience would have been if I didn't have that 1 semester break to like really experience life outside of E-Town. And sometimes I always say like my study abroad experience shaped my personality to an extent, because before I left E-Town, like before I went to Spain, I don't know how this is for you. This is just me spitballing. I thought of myself as very different. And then when I went to Europe, my eyes were like we're like so open to like what the world is outside of like a small E-Town college university bubble. I never looked at life the same again, and I still don't. Like to know like how different people are outside of the country, and like the things you can get away with outside of the country, and like the life that you can live. Like, oh my god, like I credit so much to like being able to study abroad and to experience things like that. And I like in the beginning, I brought up the Budapest Australian hostel. So weird, but so cool. Like these people that are just like, this is for you. I'm like, why are you giving me a sausage? like why are you? But like they're like, just don't question it, just take it. I'm like, okay. But like it's just, I love it. Like
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the things you can get away with, and like things that are different. I told you that I got to Australia 2 days early, right?
Yeah.
And I asked my I used to I was like, hey, I want to stay at a hostel when I'm there, because I've never been in a hostel before. Where do you recommend? Like I've never stayed in a hostel before. They were like, oh, we recommend you stay at like Gilligan's Island. I was like, okay, cool. So I booked a night at Gilligan's. Turns out Gilligan's is like the party hostel for that entire area that I was staying in. So we had our orientation in Cairns, which is in the north part of Australia.
Yes.
And Gillies, what they call it, is like this like wild nonstop party from like 8 until 4 in the morning. And I had no idea. And like I at this point had not turned 21, so I'd never been to a bar. I at this point, I was like a goody two shoes college student, so I'd never been to like one of those like crazy parties. I've been to parties and like stuff, but like not like the parties in like the quads, right? Like everyone's like hanging out, like drinking a little, and like talking. And so I show up. This is like my first time in a hostel, and I was like, whoa, hostels are crazy, man. Like the night I was there, they served me 2 free drinks as a welcome to Australia gift. They just gave me 2 free drinks. So like, yeah, on the house, enjoy, mate. And all these Australians were like hanging out with me, and like they were like, is this your first drink, mate? And I was like, yeah, it is. And they were like, go, 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 like cheering me on, like trying to get me to chug. And then there was they started like playing the music, got really dark, and people were like doing like crazy dancing out on the floor. And then they were like, mud wrestle time. And then like they brought in this like little like kiddie pool and filled it up with mud, and they had like girls in their swimsuits like wrestling in it. Like this is on my first night there, like my first night away from my house and like my little college. And I was watching a mud wrestle with like a free drink in my hand in a hostel, and I was like, this is wild. Like, is this what life is like here? And like obviously it wasn't. Like that life became
students in bikinis.
But
females in
but
bikinis.
The fact that I could do that, like you can go to a hostel at age 18, right? So like as an 18-year-old kid, I could have experienced that if I lived in Australia. You know what I mean? And like it's just wild. Like I think that Americans tend to be very protective of our like young people, even young people like that are technically adults. And I just think like in Australia, like I was saying before, they just like, here you go, you're 18, time for life. Like just do whatever you want. And I can remember when I was at the hostel, like they were like, yo, mate, why'd you come to Gillies for your first hostel, man? And I was like, I don't know. They recommended it. Like, I was like, I just went to the one they recommended. They're like, why, mate? They're like, just next door, there's like a like super chill hostel where they just like, you know, hang out on the patio. Like, this is like the like super party hotspot where everyone goes to like, you know, be crazy. And I was like, I guess CIS just wanted me to really get acclimated to Australian culture fast. And I sure did.
So CIS themselves recommended that.
Yeah,
so
that's like, I asked them like where I should go, and they were like, yeah, I recommend like go down. I was like, it's a good choice for like your first night. And I was like, okay. yeah. So I'm wondering, like, you know, I can say this now that like I don't think they're gonna watch this. So like I think that it's likely that she just looked up places with like good reviews, and everyone reviews it highly because they're like, this place is lit. You know what I mean? So she just like she didn't know the answer, so she just looked up like, you know, top rated like hostels in Australia and was just like, oh yeah, and it's like went to like the first result and gave it to me. But yeah, it was insane. And every other hostel I stayed at, I picked like a little more chill ones. I would go to the crazy hostels if I wanted to party, but I didn't want to stay there because like when you're like sleeping, you can hear like the bass thumping, like boom, boom, boom. And you're like trying to lay down in bed, and you can like it's like shaking your bed. So you know what I mean. Like, I didn't want to stay there ever again. But I was happy that was my first experience because it was it's like jumping into the deep end of the pool, you know, like there wasn't very many crazier things that I experienced my entire time there. So that was a good first step.
They said we recommend this place. We've heard it's good.
Yeah. I was like, well, depends what you mean by good. Good if you're interested in going absolutely insane on your first night in Australia, which you know I didn't go too crazy when I was there, but I got to watch other people being crazy. So it was.
You said girls in bikini mud wrestling.
Dude, I'm not lying. That's what they were doing. I'm not exaggerating. And people were placing bets on them and stuff. I wasn't doing that, but I was watching. I was like, I had my like free drink they gave me, and I was like, okay. I was like, this is happening. I was like, yeah, like
wrestling there. So I don't know if you like. I'm somewhat of a wrestle junkie. Like wrestling there is becoming popular. In like Australia? actual wrestling, yeah. And like wrestling here is gaining like some popular Australian wrestling names. So that doesn't shock me that like that's a thing.
Like, I'm glad it didn't shock you because it sure shocked me.
That's incredible. So that was your first night.
That was my first night in Australia. Yeah, and then we did orientation, and that was like I was with the Americans, and like that was when I got my more normal cultural shock. So like the price of gas, for example, they put their gas in liters, right? Not gallons. And the Australian dollar is very similar to the US dollar. They're like only a little bit apart. So when I say anything like in dollars, it's you know, you can pretty much assume it's US dollars with like a slight variation. So we're pulling past in the bus, I can remember, and I was like, oh wow, gas isn't too bad here, only $2. And they were like, yeah, that's per liter. I was like, $8 a gallon? They were like, yeah. I was like, that's pretty good prices. I was like, bruh. And when I was in New Zealand and I was doing my road trip, like I had to pay those prices. And gas was a major expense that I was not prepared for. So like that kind of cultural shock. Also like the shock of like driving a bus and it was just kangaroos just hopping along the side of the road, like in the grass. And I looked out there and I was like, guys, look, kangaroos. And we were like freaking out. The Australian bus driver was like, oh yeah, mate, we see them here all the time. Like it turns out kangaroos like are not like so like the U.S. national animal is like the bald eagle, right? So like it's like oh like if you see a bald eagle in your life, that's like really special. But like kangaroos are their national animal, but they're also like deer. They're like just everywhere. Like you'd be driving, it's like oh look, there's a kangaroo. Like you get used to seeing the roos all the time. We call them roos. And so you see in the roos like you just be like walking through a park. There's some roos over there. Like you know, you drive in. There's some roos. You know, like they're just all over the place. They're just roos, just hopping along the road, and you get used to it after a while. So those shocks, I was a little more expecting than the gillies, but they were still shocks. They were still surprises. So
awesome, that's great. And then what is it called? Like a joey, like in their pouch.
The baby, yeah. Occasionally you'd see them with joeys. It's sort of like deer, right? Like you don't see baby deer that much because like the moms are protecting them, and like the joeys mostly stay in the pouches. They don't really like peek out, you know, too much. So I only saw a couple of the babies, but I did see plenty of the adults hopping along the road, and they could definitely. Those things are ripped. Those things could kick your ass. Like,
you're done.
Yeah, you don't want to get in a fight with a kangaroo. Those things look like they lift 7 days a week. You know what I mean? Like
it's game over.
They're intense.
It's a wrap. No, the deer here. So like this is off track, but the deer here in my area scare me so much. Like I've lived in Mechanicsburg now for like 7 months, I think, and I've had too many encounters with deer while I'm driving. So like so much so to the point where I called my insurance company last month and like I prepared myself asking like what would happen if like a deer just wrecked my car. Like I didn't realize how heavy a deer area this was. Like it's so heavy because we're right next to like a foresty area. And my first week living here, I almost got wrecked by a deer. Like almost got wrecked. Like had to hit thought I destroyed my brake and my neck in the process. But I can just imagine like in Australia.
Oh yeah, people hit kangaroos all the time.
Just like oh.
Yep, people smack kangaroos with their cars. You see them along the road as well. Roadkill. Kangaroos. Yep, just like with deer. The biggest equivalent is just if you live in the Northeast, it's just deer. A kangaroo in Australia is like a deer here. Very common.
Got you. Oh wow. So oh man, so much we can talk about with just Australia. This is great. So
I know. I didn't even get to any of my trips yet. We've just been talking about daily life in Melbourne and then my orientation.
This is all we got to talk about. All we need to. So how is it going towards the end? So I'm really curious with this one because like you ingratiate yourself there. This becomes your life. This becomes who you are. And everybody that's been on this podcast goes through this. But I feel like with like people who have gone to Australia and New Zealand, it's been a little bit different. Like the difference in the sense of like you really make yourself at home. It could be a language thing. You assimilate yourself more easily, or it could just be comfort, or it could just be that Gilligan's Island. It could be any of those. How is it towards the end and the feeling of knowing you eventually do have to come back? So
yeah, it was interesting. You talk about ingratiating yourself or acclimating into the culture. It took me a while to get rid of my Australian slang that I picked up. So I always talk about the holy trinity of Australian slang. And it's reckon, heaps, and keen. So if you travel to Australia, you need to know what those 3 words mean. I reckon just means I think. It's a one-to-one comparison.
What do you reckon?
And I used to say reckon all the time when I came home. Heaps means lots. So it's a one-to-one for lots. But people say heaps in a different grammatical context. So like a lot of times they say heaps before the thing rather than after. So like you know, like I have heaps of. I guess you say I have lots of things. I have heaps of things. So I guess it's reverse. So then they say heaps after, like oh, you know, like I'll miss you heaps and things like that. Yeah. So and then keen is a little bit different. Keen is like I want to or I'd be down for that, but but it's like I'm keen. So it's like I'm keen to do that, or like I'm keen to, you know, to do an experience, which doesn't really have a one-to-one. Like I can't think of a. Like it's not really like I'm excited. It's like I'm interested or I'd want to do that. Anyways, I use all 3 of those words a lot. And so especially reckon. And I still sometimes say I reckon, even 2 years later. But yeah, so the slang was one way for sure. Celsius, temperatures in Celsius was another way that I acclimated myself to the experience there. Then I had to reacclimate when I got home.
Yes.
Oh, one of my favorite stories is, so in Australia and New Zealand, they drive on the wrong side. Shouldn't say wrong. They drive on the left side of the road. It's wrong from my perspective, but I shouldn't say wrong. They drive on the left side of the road.
Backwards drivers.
Yeah, it's super annoying. And so it makes no sense because most people in all parts of the world are right-handed. So like, I don't know why they do this, but anyways. So in Australia and New Zealand, they drive on the left side of the road. And when I was in New Zealand, I had to drive on the left side because I was driving. I did a road trip there, and
Right.
so I was getting in the right side of the car because that's where the driver's seat is on the right side since they're driving on the left. And I was driving on the left, right. And so when I was coming home from New Zealand, I was watching John Wick on my phone in the airport, and he's like running from the guys, and like he throws open the door of the car and he gets in, and I was like, John Wick, you're getting in the passenger side. Like, what are you doing, man? Like get in the driver's side. You got to get away from these guys. Like, they're coming after you. And then he started the car, and I was like, oh, right. John Wick is in America, and he is in the driver's side of the car. So like, I had acclimated myself so much to like the Australian way of driving and the New Zealand way of driving that I literally thought he was getting in the wrong side of the car and driving on the wrong side of the road until I like reacclimated myself to America. So yeah, so a lot of those like little things that you don't think about. But the bigger things are like when you live in a city, you walk everywhere. You know what I mean? Or take the train. But like you don't drive places. So like having to drive to get groceries or like drive to go to the movies or drive to see a friend, like all those things that were hard to acclimate to coming back to the US. It's like I knew it was gonna happen, but that's one of the things I miss the most is like, I think most people would say that they would prefer to be able to walk to a place, like down the street than have to drive there and like find parking and use gas and you deal with other drivers and stuff, right? So like that was one of the hardest cultural things for me was like having to get used to America's car-centric culture, right? Whereas when I was living there, I didn't have a car and I didn't need one. I traveled all throughout Australia without a car. It wasn't until I got to New Zealand that I needed one just because New Zealand's so spread apart. It would have been really hard to do that. But in all my trips in Australia and stuff, I was perfectly fine. I never even felt like I needed a car or even to like take an Uber. Like I didn't even do that. Like I was just public transit, like took me all the way that I needed. So that was the hardest thing, I think, aside from the obvious of missing the people. And then that's a given. But the public transit, that's what I'm saying. Like public transit is just until you have it, you don't realize how nice it is to have public transit readily available to you. And it's one of the things I think America could really learn from other countries about. So
yeah, they never will. I don't think the country ever will, just because like our culture is so ingrained in like everybody having a car, and the amount of jobs that like a transportation department would have to create all over the country to like have like sustainable trains that aren't just in cities, and like people that aren't just Uber drivers but like taxi drivers. It's just not our culture. But it would be nice because when I was in Europe, everything was either walking distance or there was some kind of transportation to get you where you needed to get to. Like when I was in Barcelona, loved taking the train. To know I could get to like La Sagrada Familia in one train ride and then get to like the Camp Nou where Messi plays in like 20 minutes. Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like,
and I mean, here's the thing is that like even if it takes longer, because sometimes it does, but the thing is like you don't have to do it. So like, if you wanted to check your email or your text or whatever before you left, well, now you don't have to. Get on the train first, check all that stuff while you're on the train. You know what I mean? And then like on the inverted side, like if you're consuming, if you're don't feel safe driving, you don't have to pay for an Uber, a super expensive Uber to get home, or like leave your car there and come back for it later. Like, you know what I mean? You just get on the train. So like there's so many conveniences outside of just like a lot of times it does save you time because it's a direct route. But even if it doesn't save you time, there's so many more conveniences. Not to mention the environmental impact, the ability to have crazy experiences like where like the band starts performing on the subway or something, or you like bump into somebody and you're like, oh my gosh, you guys coming from the same concert as us? Like what? Crazy. Like all those experiences, don't count those out too. There's so many more benefits to train/tram. I actually think trams are better, but train/tram versus the car.
Having a car. If it were up to me, I'd rather just like bike my way to work. and I could very much easily do that if I wanted to. I only live like 5 minutes away from my job. But then it's like the job requires you need to have a car because then I have to travel places, which is just, and I hate the stress of like a car. I would have never said this if I didn't go abroad, but like I say this now because like I just hate the stress of a car, having to pay like $400 a month just for like insurance and payment, and then like maintaining it, and then gas. That right there blows like $600 a month. Like I could use that for so many other things, but it's just the culture we're ingrained in. And not that like if you're doing public transportation, maybe you have like $100 like pass a month that you're using, but it's not like the stress of a car. And then like you also have to worry about like, oh, what if somebody nicks my car? Oh, now I have like, what if somebody hits it and I have to like pay a higher premium? It's ridiculous. I wish this wasn't our, but it is what it is. You have to deal with it. So I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, in the more rural and suburban areas of the country, it's not feasible, and I understand that. It's the same way in Australia, right? Like, I mean, like if you go like 2 hours outside the city, then there's like a bus that'll come by every hour or something, but it's not the same. But I just think that in our, like even in our city centers, like if I want to travel to Philadelphia, like they have a subway system, I guess. I'm pretty sure they do, but like I don't even know for sure because I've never used it. Because like it's cheaper and easier and better to just drive into the city. And that's what I'm talking about. It's like I feel like public transit should be encouraged in our urban centers so much more than it is.
Yeah, most definitely. Awesome. Well, the last question, we've been going pretty good. This is a great combo. But good things always do come to an end, unfortunately. So my final question for you is when, because I'm sure it'll be a when, not if, you ever get to go back to Australia, what will be your hope to accomplish when you get back there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to see my friends that I've left there. That's number one. But I think I'd like to go to some of the places that I didn't get to go when I was there. So I only had so many times off class and also so much money. So I got to travel to the Outback and to Sydney, and I spent my orientation in Cairns. None of which I talked about in this call. I thought I'd talk about all of them. We got into daily life so much more. But I would like to visit Brisbane, which is where the very famous Australian Zoo is, the one that Steve Irwin was a part of. So I'd like to visit that area, especially because one of my friends lives there, and there's supposed to be really beautiful beaches there as well. And then I'd like to go out to West Australia. There's the big city is Perth out there, and out in West Australia, there's a lot of awesome like national parks with like rock formations and things like that, as well as very beautiful beaches. They actually say some of the best beaches in the country are on the west, which is it's funny. So West Australia is far less visited than the East, and so I'd like to visit those areas as well. But I think I'd also like to, if I go back, I'd like to have a better understanding of who the current prime minister is, so that I can offer commentary on the politics when they inevitably say something about ours.
Awesome. Well, at least here it's optional to vote, so you're good.
Yeah, compulsory there. So I guess if I was there long enough to be considered a citizen, I guess I'd have to know, since it's literally you have to be there or you get like a citation, like a fine.
Yes. It was like that in Peru, and Peruvians hated that shit. They hated it with a passion, like because it's different in South America. In South America, like there's corruption, so it's on top of having to vote, they have to vote for something they want no part of most of the time, because they already know how it is as a system. And like they hated it. And if you didn't vote, then not only would you get a citation, but you get a $300 fine. And then if you don't vote the following year, then the fine doubles. Then if you don't vote for the following year, then you end up going to court. And then if you refuse, then they take you to jail. Like this is some heavy. I was like, like I didn't know countries do voting like this, because it's the idea like if you're not going to put somebody in the power to cause order, then we're going to force you to cause order, which is mind-boggling. So
yeah, there's mixed opinions on it, but yeah, I definitely try and be a little more knowledgeable, because that was one of the most embarrassing things about going there, was they were so knowledgeable about us and I wasn't about them. So try and get a little more base knowledge of what's going on there before I get there. So
the little things.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, it was awesome, my man. It was great. It was a good time. Unless you have anything else you want to chat about, I think we'll wrap up.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate the chance to be on here. I'm always happy to, if anyone is interested in studying or traveling to Australia, I can give the American perspective. Jamie, feel free to share my information with that person. Sure. I'd be happy to, because not a lot of people do travel there from America. So if you'd like that American perspective, I'd be happy to give it. And I just appreciate the opportunity to be on here, and thanks so much.
Awesome. We got to get you on here again. That was so much fun.
Be happy to.
This was a great episode. All right, good stuff. All righty, thank you, my man. And everybody have a great day.
Hey, thanks.